Okay, welcome everybody. It's good to see you. Welcome to C.A.R.E's third annual American Black History Series. Each year we host this event in order to raise awareness around the lack of African American veterinarians in the field and scholarship funds for Black vet students. And I just wanted to thank you for our generous donors. Thank you for the generous support of Maddie's Fund and Tito's Vodka for Dog People. We're aiming to raise over $250,000 for the Tuskegee's College of Veterinary Medicine scholarships. And while we share this information free of cost, we are asking that you donate what you can to contribute to the scholarship. And I believe that link is in the chat. With that, I want to again welcome everybody to this session. I am really excited to welcome my sister Jacinda Townsend, and I'm a Keisha. I work at C.A.R.E. I'm the environmental justice head in the policy division. So thank you all again to this for coming to this session on advocacy through law and literature, especially from the Affrilachian. We like to call it Affrilachian context. So, none of us, of course, are one-dimensional. We bring our own stories to this space. We all bring a story to the work we do, and that's something that I really appreciate about C.A.R.E. in particular. And even though most of us who work at C.A.R.E. alongside C.A.R.E. BIPOC, we all have our own unique experiences. It's not universal, which is why I'm really glad to bring up this topic today, because my sister and I are both from the we have Appalachian roots. We live in Kentucky, surrounded by, or we're from Kentucky, surrounded by Appalachian heritage and stories. And we're happy to bring that perspective to you. I'm also really excited because we actually, we're probably going to learn something new about each other today, because there's an age difference. So, my sister, she is brilliant. She's always been my hero. She ended up skipping 3 grades in school and leaving for Harvard at 16 when I was really little. So we actually didn't spend much of our childhoods together, but we are it's always happy to be in the same space, even though we live in different states now. Happy to have her. She is an award-winning author. She's the school board president. She is a university professor, and I won't hold it against her. She also has a law degree as well, just as I do. And just happy to bring you into this space. And I'm actually gonna try to share my screen. Got something a little funky on this screen. Let me see if I can
While
get
you're
it.
sharing, I just want to say thanks for having me, but Keisha is the brilliant, sane, responsible one. So I appreciate being related to her, and really admire all her work, all of it. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. That definitely means a lot coming from someone like you. And I don't know can you all see the screen okay? Do you see shades at all, or is there shaded parts? I'm getting a different view on my screen. Can you see it with it? It looks okay.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, so welcome to the session again. These are just a few of our on this screen. These are a few of our relatives. We've got our mom on the left-hand side here, and parents and grandparents, and then us. in the middle of this picture on the top right hand corner. Yeah, and so so as I mentioned, we kind of this is the last time we were really together when we were sending off Jacinda to college. We spent most of the childhood apart, and I think what we're going to do tonight is just really have a conversation, and I welcome everybody who is interested in participating to join us. We're going to go ahead and start with a poll question. So if we could bring up that first poll question. All right, so the first poll question is, how familiar are you with the genre of historical fiction? Very, somewhat, or not at all. You all are quick. So getting those responses in.
Keisha, sorry, it actually launched both questions, just letting you know.
Okay. So that's fine. We'll go ahead and do them both then. And the second poll question is, how familiar are you with critical race theory? The critical race theory debate in public schools and places of employment, because we're also going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, the poll responses are coming in. We have at 95%, we've got for the first question, how familiar are you with the genre of historical fiction? 33% of you are very familiar, 62 somewhat familiar, and 5% not at all. That's fine. Second question, looks like we're kind of split on the familiarity with critical race theory. This is something we'll get into in terms of the legal side of our conversation tonight, but it actually has a lot to do with the field of human and animal well-being. So we'll get into that. Some of you might have, if I say the Stop Woke Act, that is an example of it's not critical. They call it critical race theory, but it's known as anti-critical race theory legislation in the state. So we will get into that. Thank you so much for answering that poll question. All right.
So I am not familiar with the Stop Woke Act. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah. All right. Well, so we'll get into it a little bit later. But the Stop Woke Act is actually, I know you're familiar with this, the College Board debate in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there is as a result of this legislation, which prohibited the discussion of certain topics in the classroom, the College Board's AP history course in African American studies was not allowed in Florida due to that legislation. And so there has been a debate about that. Florida is one of many states who have recently enacted legislation or proposed legislation around these banned concepts. And a lot of times people will think that it stops in the classroom, but in Florida's case, it also applies to employers, which, it could affect us at C.A.R.E. It can affect anybody who potentially is interested in learning more about equity and inclusion. So we'll cover that though. But thank you. Is there any way to close that poll?
Yeah, is it disappeared? I did close it.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah, I think
That's
I
okay.
just closed it on my end. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So. All right. So, I'll let my sister talk about this. I mean, these are our grandparents. We come from a rich tradition of storytelling, and we have those phrases in our growing up. We grew up with phrases like down yonder and a different language. these are our grandparents. These are actually our great grandparents, Pappy Zach and Mammy Callie, who actually delivered babies. She was a midwife, and she delivered babies on horseback. She would travel on horseback and in the mountains of Tennessee and provide maternal health for both Black families as well as white families who couldn't afford traditional services. And actually, Jacinda, I'm going to let you, I think I might have gotten the slides just slightly. Well, no, I had a slide with your book covers, but it might not be in here. But I'm going to let you take over and talk about the genre of historical fiction and how those tie into both of your books. So you've got.
Sure. Well, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, to go back to what you were saying about, in this sort of ties in. So my first book is historical, and it's set in the it's set in this part of Kentucky that is really not technically Appalachia, but pretty close. And what I wrote it because it's in a way a love letter to a time and place that has all but disappeared. And that time and that place is very specifically the region around Lexington that was settled by freed slaves who were hired to care for the horses on all the horse farms. And you know, in some ways, the horsing industry has also sort of died down in that place, but there were a lot of Black towns around Lexington, and they you know, as Keisha mentioned, it's like they were Affrilachian before that term ever was coined, but they had their own really distinct traditions. I mean, it's interesting, like when you think about Appalachian culture and Black culture sort of blending together, it makes a really distinct culture. And I mean, one funny thing that is sort of illustrative is that I think a lot of my Black friends, and I don't know about you, Keisha, but a lot of my Black friends use a lot of spices in their food. And I'm like, no, we don't. Like in Kentucky, it's all about bourbon and sugar. There's just a lot of sugar in Appalachian food. I think Keisha had mentioned that we grew up with a whole different diction, and it is not Southern diction. And one of the great disappointments with St. Monkey was that they hired a voice actor who was just Southern. She didn't have an Appalachian accent. And so everyone in the book is caricatured on the audiobook. But, you know, when I wrote it, I actually made a little chart because my maternal grandmother used this language that is sort of, in some ways, it's much closer to like the way people spoke when they got off the boat from Wales, England, Scotland, you know, and she would use words like nary and swarp. Do you even know what a swarp is, Keisha? I had to look this up.
No, that is something that is totally new to me.
A swarp is a swarm of bees. But when I wrote the book, I had a chart like, when do you use weren't? When do you use weren't? When do you use wasn't? It's a whole you know, it's a whole systematic diction. And so I did write it as sort of a love letter to that time and place. But it does also, I mean, both the books are very different, and so like extremely different. Mother Country is set in the present, partially in Morocco and partially here. But what they both have in common is that both books are very much about how women are trying to escape patriarchy, and they're unable to do so pretty much no matter what, you know. And I think, I mean, I would say, you know, I don't know if Keisha feels this way, but that was a very strong part of our upbringing, was that you do not upset the patriarchy and that you do everything it wants you to do. It was very religiously informed, right? Very culturally informed. I mean, it kind of blows my mind to think about, but I feel like in some ways, and I wonder what you would say about this, Keisha, but in some ways it kind of informed my desire to continue to be an activist in all kinds of ways, not just as a feminist, but in all kinds of other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I did resonate with a lot of that. At the same time, I tried to think of all of the stories that we heard growing up and how women were really a central part of those stories about like, everything that they did. And I'm going to share a little bit about some of those women as we go through the presentation. But yeah, in terms of language, like I thought that it was how the whole world spoke, how our grandparent, especially our maternal grandmother, look down yonder, and it's so funny because I think we can call our dialects California Affrilachian because like we've lived in different places and have picked up that Midwestern California, Kentucky, and I think we both sound really similar, even though we spent a lot of our lives apart, which is really interesting. But yeah, thank you. And I did find your book covers, and I think Jen has put the link to where you can find out more about those books and your background in the chat. Thank you. So I'm just gonna ask you another question here. This is an article that came from our local newspaper, and there's a lot here in this. For one, this was less than a decade before you were born, Jacinda. And it blows my mind to think that you were going to school when our community was still getting used to
Yeah. I
segregation.
was the only Black kid in my entire school for 2 years. So, and I think because you went to that school later.
Yeah, so there were two of us.
Two of you in the
Actually,
whole school.
there were three
In the whole school. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really changed a lot. I mean, we were used to being the only one in our classroom for sure. Definitely one of a few in the school. And over the last 10 to 15 years, that demographic shift has been pretty substantial now.
In that school.
Oh, in this school, yeah, for sure. So this school has city school system has a pretty high percentage of BIPOC students, but our community now has about 30% of us are, yeah, according to the last census. So a lot has changed. So the year really spoke to me. The other thing about this article, it talks about how there was resistance, right? It's not, I think when we hear these stories now about Martin Luther King and we all of a sudden we got along and people were able to go to school, and wasn't that nice? And we don't hear about the court battles. We don't hear about the resistance. So one of our relatives, so this is Mama Ellen, which you'll see later on in this presentation. So our great grandmother's son was one of the plaintiffs that ended up desegregating the local school system here. So I thought that was pretty significant and appreciative that this history is still out there. And so this is a family photo of everyone, and including our family dog Melissa, who we ended up having Melissa for like she lived to be 17 years old, but she was a little puppy here, and yeah, I kind of just wanted to show that and speak to like, so my sisters, I'm the animal advocate, but you, Jacinda, have had more animals than than I'll ever have. And you really, you and my mom both really planted that seed in terms of getting me into animal advocacy. So actually, I know we've got a dog on here. I could not find Toby, our rabbit, your rabbit, who you had in law school. I was wondering if you tell us a little bit about Toby.
Yeah, Toby was a sweet little lop-eared bunny that I got her in law school, and she just lived with me. She rode with me in the car. We went back and forth, between Kentucky and North Carolina. And she lived a pretty long time, but she passed away in the most sad way. She got fleas, and I took her to a veterinarian who, I'm not sure why, but dipped her in cat flea dip. And so poor Toby, it took her about a day to die. And it was just really terrible. So, but yeah, she was very sweet.
Yeah, and thank you. And I remember spending a summer with Toby, and actually, so Toby and Melissa would play together, which we thought was just at the time like a dog and a rabbit. We didn't know that dogs and rabbits really got along, but we would, I remember when you would come home from the in the summer, and we would actually have Toby and Melissa walking through this cornfield, which I wish I had a picture of in the back. And just, spending time out in nature. And the one thing that I remember, I'm not sure if you remember this, Jacinda, but when Toby died, do you remember what you did? You wrote a letter.
Yeah, I did. I wrote a letter to the vet, and they wrote back. There was I think they refunded me her fees. They were very sorry. So yeah, but I did write a letter because I thought it was some pretty negligent treatment, So
Well,
yeah.
what was striking to me at that time, so I think I was 10 maybe, and I took a moment to find that letter, and I read every single word of that letter. And for those of you who ever, for non-attorneys, and what Jacinda wrote was a demand letter, because there weren't really a lot of legal remedies at the time for pets that have been harmed by veterinary malpractice. I mean, there really still aren't. It's very, very limited. And as an animal attorney, you really have to sometimes think outside of the box to create new precedent. So what Jacinda did, she was able to write a demand letter. So not only demanding the return of her the fee of treating Toby, but above and beyond that, like, they gave you a little bit more than that, and they promised what? Do you remember what they promised?
No, you have a better memory than I do.
You made them promise never to treat another rabbit again. They did, and they did. And so that really, planted the seed for me, because I was really passionate about, animal issues. I really loved animals. And that was my first exposure to really using advocacy in a legal context to remedy the situation. And even though that wasn't anything that could bring Toby back, it did provide some sense of solace for you. So you planted the seed there. And speaking of advocacy, maybe you can talk a little bit, as this is fascinating. You talked a little bit about historical fiction and the basis of your books in reality in Kentucky, but you've gone beyond that to do advocacy. So you've gone on it, on experiences in Mauritania and
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the second book. So the second book is it's the story of a woman who, and I know some of you have read it, and I'm just so honored and flattered, but it's the story of a woman who is struggling with infertility. She goes to Morocco on a business trip. She finds a kid who's sort of wandering the Medina, but it turns out that child actually belongs to a woman who has just escaped Mauritanian slavery. So the book's about what happens with before and after that, but one of the sort of real life bases for the book is that so in 2013 I was writing a story for Al Jazeera about women in development. And I went to Mauritania to interview a woman who worked for SOS Esclaves, which is a nonprofit that basically rescues people, or not rescues people from, well, sometimes they do rescue people from slavery, but they sort of try to set them up once they escape, because it's really hard to, first of all, it's hard to escape slavery there because it's mostly a desert country. Everything is so super isolated. As you can imagine, like if you run away, you're just in the desert. Like you're either going to be pretty easy to find or you're going to die. And then what if you do manage to escape, because employment there is caste-based, there's nothing for you to do. So, everybody has a job assigned to them based on who their family is. If you're come from a family of mechanics, you're a mechanic. So people escape and they have no way of making money. So I snuck in on a tourist visa and I met these anti-slavery activists. They introduced me to a family of escaped slaves. This woman had just escaped slavery and had given birth on her way out of the desert. She had 8 kids, and none of the kids were the same color because her master had leased her out as a prostitute. So I spoke to her through translator, and I was like, what can I do for you? And she's like, just tell my story. So her story became the basis of the character who is an escaped slave. I'm now working on another book. It's about police brutality, and it's kind of about the way that, when someone is killed by the police, we kind of think of that person. Maybe they'll be referred to as, the son of this person, the father of this person. But what we don't understand is that trauma not only ripples out to that family, but it's that community. It becomes sort of state-sponsored terrorism, right? And so some of that came out of, I was writing for Al Jazeera, and I spoke to a lot of survivors. I spoke to Tamir Rice's mother. I spoke to Sabrina Fulton. Why am I blanking her son's name? Skittles, the boy who was killed over a better. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Trayvon Martin's mother. I spoke to some lesser known victims' mothers, and they told me all the myriad ways that had sort of created family suffering and community suffering, and it was pretty deep. So I feel like, as an artist, we are the people who are most called to sort of step out of our skins and into other people's skins and sort of live that experience, if only in our heads, and then step back into our skins and make it into art. And so I've always felt called upon to make mine more political than, the American aesthetic typically dictates that it be. So, and a question for you, Keisha, because I think we both have this passion for social justice, where would you say that came from? Why do we have that in common, do you think?
Well, I think our mom is for me, she was an inspiration for that. I knew like about all of these issues. She is an anti-war. I knew that from the time I was 3 or 4. We were in the middle of conflicts, and she would write letters to the editor, and very controversial letters to the editor, I must admit, in this very conservative community. She marched against the KKK when she was pregnant with me. And I think that just her commitment to justice, and through her daily day-to-day life, also as her experience. She's a retired high school teacher, so she wove those elements of social justice into everything she taught her students. And she would come home with these papers, like in her red grade book. And I would sneak and read, some of her prompts that she would give to the class, and read some of these student papers. But she was, I guess she was described as in town as a firecracker. She was always taking on a practice at great personal and professional risk. And so I think that's where that came from. Actually, since you mentioned that, I'm going to see if I can skip ahead, because I was going to talk about this issue. I don't know if you remember this. So our mom, she proposed and she started a diversity class, which is really relevant to today's atmosphere, because these are some of the concepts that are now being banned in classrooms. But this was by far one of the most popular courses in the school. I mean, it was I think it was hard to get into as an elective. And I remember the time when the school board decided that it was, they wanted to cancel this class because they didn't feel like it was teaching a good message. It was too, they called it politically correct at the time. And she ended up having 300 students write letters. They protested. They went to the board meetings and defended the desire to have this class unsuccessfully. But a lot of those students went on to have careers in international advocacy, and they attribute a lot of their success to being able to be exposed to different ideas. And this was also at a time, when this course was being taught. I believe that her school at the time had 7 African-American students out of over 1,000. So it was still during that time when it wasn't a very diverse community. And when so it actually, what ended up inspiring her to create this course in particular was that there was actually a race riot between students at one school. I think it was Warren East, and maybe Warren Central. I might have those schools wrong, but they actually were coming in trucks with rebel flags, and it was a real riot out in a parking lot. And so she was inspired to create this course. And 30 years later, the students who took it are still writing, talking about how influential it was. And they are advocating for the continued discussion in classroom curriculums around these issues. So that was a long answer.
And I mean, that was so
And-
it was so before its time, you know what I mean? I mean, this is a fight that's going on now. But that was such foresight to start that class. I mean, there are school districts that are just now getting them in 2023.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned your involvement and your attention to the issue of police brutality. I know we were going to talk about the reaction to Tyree Nichols's death, which I didn't, I watched a part of that video and I just, I watched a few seconds and that was really all I could tolerate. But it really reminded me it took me back to early 90s, or was it late 80s, when Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing came out. And I was always excited. So we did spend the summers together. And one of the things that I was always really excited about was that you would go to the video store and get these Black movies that would never be shown in our movie theater. I don't know when the first, I think Spike Lee's School Days, they played that. I don't think they played Do the Right Thing.
They didn't, because I wrote a letter about them. Yeah. They surely did not. No.
Yeah, but for those of you all who haven't seen it, I mean, it was really about a story of police brutality. And I remember being really little, and there was a character. I want try not to spoil much of the movie for those of you who want to watch it, but this character's name is Radio Raheem, and he ends up ultimately getting choked to death by police officers. And I remember seeing that scene as a really small kid and being like, oh my gosh, like this is what, who would think of that, right? Like who would think of putting this in a movie, and what kind of world, what is this? I mean, it was not reality for me at all. And then later on in life, I learned that that story was actually based upon a true life story. A gentleman named Michael Stewart, who is portrayed by Radio Raheem in that movie. And I just think, and I don't have children. You were the one who were brave enough to have kids in this day and age. But it just made me think, today's kids, they see the real thing, right? And that is their if it's not their lived experience already from what they're witnessing in the community, it is something that their people in this community are trying to grapple with at a really, really young age. And I'm just wondering, as you talk to the mothers and as you are a mother yourself, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I live in such a bubble because, so for instance, we have here in Washtenaw County, we do not have school resource officers in the school. Police are not allowed. I mean, there was the second grade at one of our schools had a policeman visit as part of a unit, and there was an outcry. There was a community outcry, and so that isn't to say that there isn't police brutality here, but I am lucky that I've been able to insulate my kids from it. And in a lot of ways, it was a goal of mine as a mother, and I feel like probably it's a goal that a lot of Black mothers have, is just, how do I insulate my kids from all kinds of things, right? School segregation, police brutality, air pollution, water pollution. It's a constant struggle. It's a gargantuan struggle, I mean, I try to give my kids a lot of Black joy, because there is a lot of there's a lot out there, and I am not gonna be able to 100% insulate them, right? I don't know, in some ways I feel like you and I were insulated from, to some extent, just because we we come from we had a lot of family in that town, we had a lot of sort of cultural capital, social capital in that town. So, but it is hard. It's hard to insulate your Black child from that sort of thing, right? I mean, we talked about that school where we were the only Black kid, the one at three. A lot of people don't know this, but the schools now are as segregated as they were during Brown versus Board of Education. The school integration peaked in 1987, and now like white flight and other sort of nefarious sort of de facto ways of resegregating schools have caused them to become way more segregated. So you have schools where we have a school in our district where there are 3 Black children in the whole school. Lots of Black children, the only Black children in their grades. We have that now. And yeah, I mean, it's just, continually hard, right, to insulate. I think even as an adult, right? Don't you think it's hard to sort of insulate yourself?
Yeah, no, it's really impossible. I think though that growing up, I guess I am really grateful that we didn't have social media and we didn't have these as much as the video camera has done for exposure of these things. It is a very psychologically traumatizing thing to go to. And I just remember my experience growing up. I think a lot of people they still have this experience. Like, I would not be afraid to call police locally, right? I think we're still a community where we know each other, and we know the people who are serving in our community, and we try to have relationships. I don't think that I would feel the same way in any other city.
Yeah.
I would hesitate. I remember I was going to a bar association meeting, and in the middle of I think it was Mayor de Blasio's, no, sorry, that wasn't de Blasio, it was another who came before him. Giuliani, was it Giuliani stopping?
No, Giuliani was the Giuliani time though. He was, yeah, Bloomberg. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Okay, thank you. It was a stop and frisk program that was billed as wildly successful, that unfortunately we became a statistic. And I was asking for directions because there was I think a race going on, and I was trying to get to this bar meeting, right? And I found an officer, and I was like, is there a detour? And that was, I think that was suspicious enough, us even asking, right? Like, we were driving, so we ended up getting, searched, the car getting searched. And I remember at the time I was in law school, and when they said, can we search your car? I was like, well, sure, I would do that locally. But when I was in law school, we had a civil procedure instructor, who said I would never allow that to happen, just because of the risk associated with it. And I was like, well, that's nice that you have the ability to feel empowered to decline that thing. She wasn't BIPOC. And I just remember that being a really defining experience. And I think that a lot of children now, when they are being exposed to the activities of law enforcement and their instruction, it's not a really positive experience that they have. As mentoring youth in the last couple of years virtually, and we presented this scenario of what would you do if someone came to you banging on your door in the middle of the night, they were needing help, and not a single one of the people, not a single one of the youth responded that they would call the police. Which was both unfortunate and really striking to me to realize that that's really the world that we
Uh-huh.
live in. And I realize we're kind of got like 12 minutes left in the talk, and I've skipped all around. There is I wanted to show some more of these photos. So this is actually, I don't remember if you don't know if you remember this, Jacinda, and I don't know if you can. Oh, sorry. The bunny. So
Oh, that's Toby.
no, that's not Toby.
Oh,
No, that's because I was a baby. So you had a lot of rabbits.
okay.
Toby was a little bit later. But so this is a neighborhood that we had a lot of experience, a historically African American neighborhood in our community. That was the second neighborhood that our family lived in. We were originally inhabitants of a community called Jonesville that no longer exists. Van Marion. Oh, and here's, my mom many years ago was able to put together some photos of Jonesville. So it was built by descendants of enslaved people. And we had a lot of businesses. Our family owned a lot of property in Jonesville. This is Mama Lizzie, who is one of our ancestors. And it's amazing to hear some of the stories that our mom told about her. So she was actually a real estate investor back in almost 100 years ago, and brought up properties. Her parents were enslaved, and they worked hard to gain this property. They gave it to her. She gave it to her daughter, Mama Ellen, which is our great grandmother. And Mama Ellen, this is her at her birthday party. I think she was still alive when you were around. You got to meet her, Jacinda. I wasn't. It died before I was born. So basically what happened to her community is the university, our local university, decided through what they called an urban renewal program to condemn all of the homes, all of the businesses that we had, and obtain it through eminent domain. And so these are the kinds of stories that the bills that we talked about, the anti-critical race theory bills, don't really want to talk about. They want to say that either you can't talk about inequality at the outset, or if you do, you have to say, oh, it was all in the past, and it's all been fixed now, and everything now is a result of hard work and meritocracy. But so this is just an example of some of the fight that happened to keep the property. So Mama Ellen was not going to leave her property with a fight. Will Taylor and Harry Taylor were her relatives as well, and our relatives. So there were 5 property owners that refused to leave, and 3 of those 5 were our relatives. And this is just an example of how. Now, this was a very low value, even during that time, for their property, based on what it was going to be, which is home of our local football stadium and university expansion. And this is the attorney for the university basically saying, that is just excessive, exorbitant, and unreasonable. Why? Because they were simply colored residential property. It's simply 5 colored residences. And this is why the value of these properties should be lowered. And I'll go back here, and this is something that I recently found. So this is a letter from the university to our great grandmother saying, you know, unfortunately they lost the lawsuit, and then the university got the property through eminent domain, and this is basically the eviction note from the university, which
There, go ahead. Yeah,
Oh,
that
no.
was, there's a documentary. I saw it a couple of weeks ago. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it talks about how Black people lost 325 billion acres of land. Not this way, other ways, you know, just stunning. And that generally that land was taken violently. You know, some people were even murdered, and then people would swoop in and take the land. Just a stunning amount of land has been lost.
Yeah, and including our own. You know, what's really striking to me is like, you know, this is land that was willed to our mom, right? That would have been willed to us. And this letter, I'm not sure if you can see, I got the date cut off by accident, but it was in 1958, which seems like a really long time ago. But you know, it was really, you know, less than like, you know, 15 years before you were born. And in context, when you think about how long ago September 11th was, right? Like that was even longer ago, but it seems like it was just yesterday to me. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I see in the chat here, James has asked, what are your thoughts, experiences on being exceptional within a country that celebrates exceptionalism, but often not when it stems from African Americans?
Yeah, well, usually people want to just deny the exceptional, you know, particularly, I mean, my experiences in academia are that people just basically have found ways to deny what I've done. They've found ways to deny my publication record. They've found ways to, you know what I mean, sort of, yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I go back to what I said about I offer my children lots of Black joy, and that reward has to be internal. That's what keeps me going, you know, as well as the idea that like I'm obviously ticking them off or they wouldn't be doing this to me. So, yeah. What do you think, Keisha?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's tough, you know. I feel like yeah, I resonate exactly with what you just said. And you know, it's like you almost have to be exceptional to even, you know, have a basic way of life. I mean, I think of our land being, you know, pretty much taken and devalued. And then, you know, Mama Ellen was a widow, right? And she like had her whole life there, and she was, I don't know how old she was when she was moved. And then we see it happen over again. Like it was so like that, the street that I just showed you of where the rabbit and the kids were, and where we all were standing, that was about to be demolished a couple of years ago, and there had to be a lawsuit to preserve those homes. And it's just an ongoing challenge, but it's almost, you know, it's necessary to be exceptional in a way. And I know we're kind of getting close to time. I just wanted to end. I wish that our mom could have been part of this conversation, and she will be because something, you know, I love that we're able to still have conversations, and she has she's got some health issues, but she's still got, a good long-term memory, and she can tell stories. And this was Chris Rock recently made headlines when he said that his mom had to go to the veterinarian to get dental work because of segregation. Black people couldn't go to the dentist. They had to go to the veterinarian to get dental work. And, I talked to my mom about this experience. And I asked her, because she was, she grew up during segregation and didn't have access to hospitals and things like that. Sorry for the skipping. I don't know if you can hear it, but I asked her, what was her experience growing up and taking care of her pets. And here's what she had to say.
Veterinarian, that's what they did. The hospital was segregated, not for dogs and animals. If you had the money. Oh, see, these people most Black people live on farms themselves. Okay. Oh. So yeah. We just take them wherever we thought we could get them, to get them fixed up.
Oh, sorry.
Veterinarian, that was their hospital was segregated, not for dogs and animals. If you had the money. Oh, see, these people most Black people live on farms themselves. Okay. Oh. So yeah. We just take them wherever we thought we could get them, to get them fixed up. And although we didn't have the money, we got that pet cat to the doctor. They did. Yes, C.A.R.E.
So that was pretty striking. To think that she couldn't get health care, but because of this service that had an exchange for money, the pets could go to see the veterinarian, even if they were owned by a Black person during the age of segregation. And she definitely inspired me to go down my path. I know she inspired you, Jacinda, as well. And I thought that her voice would be a good way to end. I know there's so much that we could say, but we're at the end of our time. I thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jacinda. Hopefully we can continue to have these conversations.
Yes. Thanks for having me. And it was so nice to meet everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to end on the invitation to join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Our CEO, James Evans, will be hosting a panel discussing the hidden influence of African art on American art and culture with artist Ernest Shaw and celebrated soprano Adia Evans. All three are alumni of Baltimore School for the Arts. And the series, you're going to get a special treat, is going to end with a special performance of Summertime sung by Adia Evans. So more on that, look at our social media. I think that there might be, yes, there's in the chat as well, a way to register. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening, rest of the evening.